Alex Cooper had always been careful about his investments. He wasn't the kind of man to make impulsive decisions, especially when it came to real estate. After years of working tirelessly in finance, dealing with unstable markets, corporate greed, and watching people make reckless choices, he had learned that security wasn't just about money, it was about control. That's exactly why he had chosen this house. Nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood with just the right balance of privacy and accessibility, it was the perfect retreat from the stress of city life. A spacious lawn, a sturdy fence, and enough distance from his nearest neighbors to ensure that he wouldn't have to deal with petty drama or the invasive presence of strangers. These were the things that had sold him on the property. Everything had checked out. The previous owners had left the place in excellent condition, the paperwork was in order, and there was no sign of past disputes or unresolved legal issues. It was supposed to be a straightforward, problem-free investment. That illusion shattered the moment he returned from his 2-week business trip and found an enormous, rusting RV parked right in the middle of his pristine front lawn. At first, he thought he was looking at a moving truck or maybe a contractor's vehicle, but as he pulled into his driveway, his stomach twisted into a knot. The thing wasn't just parked temporarily, it looked settled, as if whoever owned it had no intention of moving it anytime soon. A pair of old lawn chairs were set up next to the vehicle, an ashtray overflowing with cigarette butts sat on the ground, and an extension cord snaked from the RV's side window toward his outdoor power outlet. The audacity of it left him momentarily frozen in place. He cut the engine and stepped out, his shoes sinking slightly into the damp grass as he approached. From inside the RV, he could hear the low hum of a television and the occasional clinking of bottles. The air was thick with the stale scent of burnt grease, old beer, and something else he couldn't quite place, something metallic and sour. He knocked on the flimsy metal door, the sound echoing dully inside. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then a slow shuffle of movement, the creaking of floorboards, and the door swung open just enough for a man to peek out. Alex recognized him immediately. Clarence Riggs, a man he had only ever exchanged a few words with in passing, a neighbor. Technically, though he lived several houses down the street and had a reputation for being both unpredictable and a little too comfortable skirting the edges of the law. He was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered but gone soft with age, his graying beard unkempt, his eyes bloodshot and sunken as if he hadn't slept properly in days. He smelled like old cigarettes and cheap cologne, the kind that didn't mask bad hygiene so much as amplify it. Clarence grinned, revealing a row of uneven teeth, and leaned against the doorframe as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "Well, look who finally decided to come home," he said, his voice hoarse from years of smoking. "Didn't think I'd see you for another week or so." Alex narrowed his eyes, already feeling the anger simmer beneath his skin. "What the hell is this?" he asked, gesturing toward the RV. "Why is this here?" Clarence exhaled slowly, as if this conversation bored him already. "Needed a place to park," he said, shrugging. "Figured your lawn was as good as any." Alex stared at him, waiting for the punchline, but there wasn't one. The man was completely serious. His patience thinned. "You can't just park your damn RV on my property. Move it. Now." Clarence tilted his head slightly, his grin widening in a way that sent a prickle of unease down Alex's spine. "See, that's where you're wrong, buddy. This land? It's not yours. Not really." He disappeared inside for a moment, and returned with a folded sheet of paper, yellowed with age, the edges frayed. He held it up, tapping the page with one grimy finger. "See this? Got it from my old man. Says right here, this land was part of our property before they redrew the lines. So technically I got every right to be here. You're the one trespassing on my space." Alex took a step forward, snatching the paper from Clarence's hand before he could react. He unfolded it and scanned the contents. It was a crude, hand-drawn map, a faded property line sketched out in uneven ink, but it wasn't anything official. There were no legal seals, no signatures from city officials, no recorded documentation, just a scrap of paper with a claim written in chicken scratch. He scoffed. "This is worthless," he said, shoving the paper back at him. "It's not a deed, it's not a legal document, it's bullshit." Clarence's expression didn't change. He tucked the paper back into his pocket and crossed his arms. Tell you what he said. If you're so sure, why don't you go ahead and try to make me leave? Call whoever you want. Cops, lawyers, doesn't matter. You'll find out soon enough that some things ain't as simple as you think. Alex clenched his jaw. He had dealt with stubborn, manipulative people before, businessmen who twisted contracts to suit their needs, executives who found loopholes to avoid responsibility, but this was something else. This wasn't a boardroom where logic and paperwork ruled. This was a man who thrived on chaos, someone who knew how to push boundaries just enough to stay on the right side of the law while making life miserable for anyone who crossed him. But Alex wasn't about to let some washed-up scam artist squat on his land. He pulled out his phone, dialed the non-emergency police number, and waited. The call rang twice before a dispatcher answered. He kept his voice level as he explained the situation, detailing how Clarence had illegally parked on his property, how he was refusing to leave, how he was stealing electricity and water. The dispatcher listened patiently before responding. Sir, property disputes like this are civil matters. We can send an officer to mediate, but legally, we can't remove someone from land they claim to have a right to, without a court order. You'll need to go through the legal eviction process if he refuses to move. Alex inhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. He knew the law wasn't always immediate, but hearing it out loud only made his frustration grow. So there's nothing you can do. We can document the situation, make a report, but in cases like this, legal action is usually required. Alex's fingers tightened around his phone. He ended the call without another word and turned back to Clarence, who was watching him with something close to amusement. Told you, Clarence said. Ain't that simple. Alex exhaled slowly, forcing himself to think clearly. He wouldn't let this escalate into something reckless, but he also wasn't about to let a man like Clarence manipulate the system to his advantage. If the law required a process, then he would go through the process. But he wouldn't let his guard down. Not for a second. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a fight for control, and Alex had no intention of losing. Alex didn't sleep well that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined Clarence sitting out there in the RV, smoking, drinking, watching TV, living like he owned the place. The sheer arrogance of it made Alex's blood boil. He had worked too hard, been too careful, to let some washed-up scam artist dictate what happened on his land. He wasn't some naive first-time homeowner who could be easily manipulated or intimidated. He knew how to handle people who thought they could bend the rules to suit themselves. But as the hours stretched on, he realized that knowing how to handle them and actually getting rid of them were two very different things. The law was frustratingly slow, and if Clarence was banking on that, then this could drag out for weeks, even months. That thought alone was enough to keep Alex from getting any real rest. The next morning, he made his first move. If Clarence wanted to steal his electricity and water, then Alex would make it as difficult as possible. He shut off the outdoor outlets and disconnected the hose. As he coiled it up, he noticed the indentation in the grass where Clarence had been standing, the deep grooves his boots had left behind. He'd been out here recently, probably before dawn, checking to see if Alex had done anything. That realization sent a chill down Alex's spine. He was dealing with someone who wasn't just stubborn, he was calculated, aware, always a step ahead. When he turned to head back inside, Clarence was already watching him from the RV doorway, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. You think that's going to stop me? He asked, tilting his head slightly. Come on, man, be reasonable. I got no problem sharing. You let me stay, we both win. You make things difficult, well, you might not like where that road leads. Alex forced himself to remain calm, even though every fiber of his being wanted to rip that smug grin off the bastard's face. You have 24 hours to move your shit off my property, he said, voice steady, controlled. After that, I start taking legal action. Clarence chuckled, shaking his head. You really don't get it, do you? He leaned against the doorframe, scratching at his beard. I don't have to move. Not unless I feel like it. And trust me, I don't feel like it. Alex clenched his fists, then turned away before he could do something he'd regret. He needed to be smart about this. Getting physical wouldn't solve anything. If anything, it would only make things worse. Instead, he spent the next few hours gathering information. He called his lawyer, who confirmed what the police had said: this was a civil matter, and Clarence couldn't just be forcibly removed. It had to go through the courts, and that meant time. But there were other ways to make Clarence uncomfortable. He went to the city records office, hoping to find something that would contradict whatever bullshit claim Clarence thought he had. He combed through old property records, zoning documents, anything that might prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Clarence had no legal right to be there. When he finally found what he was looking for, he almost laughed. The original property lines had been redrawn nearly 30 years ago, and there was absolutely no mention of Clarence's family ever owning that section of land. The map Clarence had shown him was nothing more than an old, useless relic, a desperate attempt to twist history in his favor. Armed with that knowledge, Alex went straight to the county office and filed a formal trespassing complaint. It was another step in the process, another layer of paperwork that would eventually lead to Clarence's eviction, but he knew it wouldn't be immediate. When he got home, the RV door was closed, the curtains drawn, but he knew Clarence was still inside. The bastard hadn't moved an inch. Alex stepped onto his porch, looking out over his own yard, the space that was rightfully his, and felt a deep, simmering anger settle in his chest. He wouldn't let this stand. That night, things escalated. Alex had just finished his dinner when he heard something outside, a low, scraping sound, like metal against wood. His entire body went rigid. He set his plate down carefully, moving toward the front door with slow, measured steps. Through the peephole, he saw nothing. The yard was empty, the RV silent, the night still. But something felt off. He opened the door, stepping onto the porch, and that's when he saw it. The breaker box on the side of his house was open. The lock had been snapped clean off, the wires pulled and twisted. His power flickered. A surge, then darkness. The whole house went dead. A surge of rage crashed over him. He spun toward the RV, heart pounding. "Clarence," he bellowed, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Get the hell out here." The RV door creaked open. Clarence stepped out slowly, lazily, like he had all the time in the world. He took a long drag from a cigarette before exhaling, watching Alex through the thin veil of smoke. Problem neighbor. Alex stormed toward him, fists clenched. "You cut my goddamn power." Clarence raised his hands in mock innocence. "Now why would I do something like that?" Alex didn't buy the act for a second. "I'm warning you. This is your last chance. Pack up and go, or I will make sure you regret ever pulling this stunt." Clarence didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, staring at Alex with that same infuriating smirk. Then slowly he reached into his back pocket and pulled out something small, flicking it toward Alex's feet. A fuse. One of his own. Alex inhaled sharply. This was no longer just an inconvenience. This was war. Clarence took a step back, still smiling. "Like I said, buddy, you make things difficult for me? I make things difficult for you." Alex watched him disappear back into the RV, the door shutting behind him with a quiet finality. His pulse was hammering in his ears, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. He knew this wasn't over. Clarence had just sent a message, loud and clear. Alex wasn't just dealing with a squatter. He was dealing with someone who knew exactly how far he could push before the law caught up. Someone who wasn't afraid to make things personal. And that meant Alex had to be smarter, stronger, more relentless, because now it wasn't just about getting Clarence off his property. It was about making sure he never came back. Alex woke up with a weight on his chest, the kind of oppressive tension that came from knowing his home was under siege, not in the dramatic sense of gunfire or forced entry, but in the slow, methodical way that drove a man to madness. His own property was no longer his sanctuary. He lay in bed for several minutes, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of Clarence's RV generator, the low mechanical growl that never seemed to stop. It wasn't loud enough to be a blatant disturbance, but it was constant, a subtle reminder that the intruder had no intention of leaving. By the time he forced himself out of bed, the unease in his gut had settled into something heavier. He brewed coffee, staring out the kitchen window at the RV, now an eyesore that dominated his once pristine lawn. A part of him still couldn't believe this was happening, that in a neighborhood like this, where property values were meticulously maintained, where rules and regulations were supposed to protect homeowners from exactly this kind of nonsense, he was stuck in what felt like a psychological war zone with a man who refused to acknowledge reality. He had followed the right steps, filed the complaints, made the calls, and yet Clarence was still there, sitting comfortably on land that wasn't his, daring Alex to do something about it. Today, Alex decided, was the day things changed. He started with the basics. He drove to the city zoning office, determined to find out if there was any way to fast-track the eviction process. But as expected, bureaucracy had its own sense of time, slow and indifferent. The woman behind the counter, polite but disinterested, confirmed that his case was moving through the proper channels but offered no guarantees. "These things take time," she said with a practiced smile, as if she hadn't just dismissed the urgency of his situation in one breath. Alex clenched his jaw but thanked her anyway. As he walked back to his car, he noticed something unsettling. A pickup truck was parked across the street, old but well-maintained, with tinted windows that obscured the driver. It hadn't been there when he arrived, and something about it felt off. He stood by his car for a moment, watching, waiting for some sign of movement, but none came. Maybe he was being paranoid. Maybe this whole situation was starting to mess with his head. He shook off the feeling and drove home, only to find something that made his stomach drop. A trail of deep tire tracks carved through his lawn, the once even grass now a mess of churned-up dirt and mud. At first he thought it was just Clarence being careless with his RV, but then he saw it, the marks weren't just from parking. They were deliberate. Circular. As if someone had been driving in slow, intentional loops right outside his house. His pulse quickened. Clarence was nowhere in sight, but the RV door was slightly ajar. Alex walked toward it, every step controlled, his breathing measured. He knocked, but there was no answer. He knocked again, harder this time. "Clarence," he called out, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. "We need to talk." Silence. He hesitated for only a second before pushing the door open. The smell hit him first: stale beer, sweat, and something metallic, like rust or old blood. The interior was cluttered, filled with the kind of junk that accumulated when a man lived without discipline. Empty cans, crumpled newspapers, a dirty mattress with a blanket haphazardly tossed over it. But Clarence wasn't inside. Alex scanned the space quickly, searching for any sign of where he might have gone, when his eyes landed on something that sent a chill down his spine. On the small fold-out table near the window, there was a piece of paper. His name was scrawled across it in thick, uneven letters. He picked it up, his fingers tightening around the edges as he read. "You think this is your land, you think you can just make me leave. But you don't understand, do you? Some things don't belong to you just because you have a piece of paper that says they do. Some things are taken, earned, fought for. And you haven't earned a damn thing." His grip on the note tightened. His first instinct was to rip it apart, but he forced himself to stay calm. This wasn't just some squatter overstaying his welcome. This was a man playing a game, setting the stage for something bigger, and Alex refused to be a pawn in it. He stepped out of the RV, scanning the yard, the street, the houses beyond. Everything looked normal, but now he knew better. Normal was an illusion. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the window, lights off, watching, waiting. At 2:37 a.m., movement. A shadow near the back fence, just barely visible against the darkness. It was quick, subtle, disappearing before Alex could get a clear look. But it was enough. Enough to know that Clarence wasn't just waiting, he was watching. The next morning, Alex took action. He installed additional floodlights around the property, bright enough to illuminate every inch of the yard. He reinforced his locks, added security cameras, every step a calculated measure to take back control. If Clarence wanted to play games, fine. But Alex wasn't about to play blind. At noon, a knock at his door. He opened it to find Clarence standing there, looking unbothered, amused even. "You really think all this fancy security is going to do anything?" he asked, gesturing toward the newly installed cameras. Alex didn't answer. Clarence sighed, shaking his head. "You don't get it, do you? I've been here long before you, and I'll be here long after. You're just a temporary problem, something to wait out. And trust me, I can wait a long time. Alex stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. You've got until the end of the week. After that, I don't care what it takes, I will make sure you're gone. Clarence's smirk faltered for just a second, and in that moment, Alex saw something he hadn't before. Doubt. He slammed the door in Clarence's face. That night, the generator stopped humming. For the first time in weeks, there was silence. Alex exhaled, feeling a small, temporary victory settle in his chest. But deep down, he knew better. The real fight was just beginning. Alex knew better than to mistake temporary silence for victory. The absence of Clarence's usual noise, the constant hum of the generator, the faint buzz of his late-night radio, the occasional drunken mumbling that drifted through the walls of the RV wasn't a sign that he had given up. It was a shift in tactics, a recalibration, the kind of quiet that came before something worse, and Alex was right to be suspicious. The first sign that something was off came the following evening. As he pulled into his driveway after a long day of dealing with lawyers, useless city officials, and the overwhelming frustration of a system designed to move at a snail's pace, he noticed something strange. His front door was unlocked. He was sure he had locked it that morning. It was muscle memory, something he did without thinking. The small silver key turning in the deadbolt, the quick check before he left he never forgot. But now, as he stood there with his hand on the doorknob, he felt the weight of uncertainty press down on him. He pushed the door open slowly, scanning the space with the sharp awareness of someone who knew they were being toyed with. Nothing looked disturbed at first glance. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry. Just his home, the same as he had left it. But then he saw it. The smell hit him before his brain fully registered what he was looking at. On his kitchen counter, right next to the coffee maker he used every morning, sat a dead rat. Its small body was curled unnaturally, fur matted with something dark, dried blood crusting around its mouth. It hadn't been killed cleanly. It had suffered. And next to it, scrawled on a scrap of newspaper in thick, smeared black ink, was a single word: eviction. Alex's blood turned to ice. He wasn't the type to scare easily. He had dealt with difficult people before, clients who thought they were smarter than him, executives who tried to play power games, men who believed that intimidation was a tool reserved only for those willing to use it ruthlessly. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was personal. Clarence had been inside his home. The thought alone sent a pulse of pure rage through Alex's body, the kind of anger that made his hands clench into fists before he even realized he was doing it. He forced himself to breathe, to think. There were no cameras inside. He hadn't thought he'd need them. His security system only covered the outside of the house, and even then, the cameras he had installed after their last confrontation had been focused on the RV in the yard, not his front door. But he would check the footage anyway. Moving quickly, he pulled up the security feed on his phone. The footage from earlier in the day showed nothing unusual. His driveway was empty, the street quiet, the RV still sitting there like an unmovable tumor on his lawn. But then, at exactly 2:13 p.m., the motion sensor by his back gate triggered. The screen flickered as the camera switched on, and Alex saw him, Clarence. He moved with a casual ease, as if he belonged there, slipping through the gate without hesitation. He carried something in his right hand, a small plastic bag, sagging slightly from the weight of whatever was inside. He didn't rush. He didn't sneak. He just walked right up to the back door, out of sight from the camera, and then, nothing. Alex fast-forwarded, his pulse hammering in his ears. At 2:27 p.m., Clarence reappeared, stepping back through the gate, empty-handed this time. He adjusted his jacket, took one last glance at the house, and walked off. He had been inside for 14 minutes. Alex closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and exhaled through his nose. His first instinct was to grab his keys, march straight to the RV, and rip Clarence out of it by force. But that was exactly what Clarence wanted. He wanted a reaction. He wanted Alex to lose control, and Alex wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Instead, he called the police. The officer who arrived was younger, barely out of his 20s, with the tired expression of someone who had already dealt with too many pointless disputes that day. He took notes, nodded in the right places, but in the end, his response was infuriatingly predictable. "There's no sign of forced entry, sir," he said, glancing around the kitchen. "Nothing was stolen. No direct threat was made." Alex gestured to the rat, still lying there, its body stiff with rigor mortis. "You don't call that a threat?" The officer sighed. "It's not direct. It's implied. And implied threats are hard to act on. Do you have proof that he left it here?" Alex pulled up the footage on his phone, showing Clarence entering through the back gate. The officer watched, lips pressing into a thin line. "It shows him on your property but not inside your house, unless you have interior cameras." "I don't." "Then it's your word against his. You could file for a restraining order, but those take time to process." Alex forced himself to stay calm. He wanted to scream, to demand action, but he knew it wouldn't make a difference. The law only worked when there was undeniable proof, and Clarence knew exactly how to stay just inside the lines of plausible deniability. After the officer left, Alex disposed of the rat, scrubbed the counter clean, and sat at his kitchen table, fingers pressed to his temples. This wasn't just about making him uncomfortable anymore. This was a warning. A message. That night, he couldn't sleep. At exactly 3:12 a.m., his phone vibrated against the nightstand, a motion alert. He sat up immediately, grabbing the phone with one hand and reaching for the baseball bat he now kept next to the bed with the other. The live feed loaded, and there he was, Clarence, standing at the edge of the driveway, just beyond the reach of the floodlights, not moving, just watching. Alex's hands tightened around the bat. Enough was enough. He threw off the covers, pulled on a jacket, and stormed outside. The cold night air hit him like a slap, but he barely felt it. Clarence didn't move, didn't flinch. He just stood there, smiling. Alex stopped a few feet away, his voice low, controlled. "You break into my house again, and I won't bother with the cops." Clarence's smile widened. "Who said I broke in?" Alex took a step closer. "You think this is a game?" Clarence tilted his head. "It's always been a game, buddy. You just didn't realize you were playing." Alex exhaled sharply, forcing himself to walk away before he did something he couldn't take back. He locked the door behind him, double-checked every window, and sat in the dark, gripping the bat like a lifeline. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. This was war. Alex woke up before dawn, his body jolting upright before his mind had fully registered why. The house was silent, but something was wrong, a deep, unsettling feeling gnawing at the back of his mind like an alarm that hadn't quite gone off yet. He sat there in the dark for a few seconds, listening, waiting, scanning the room for anything out of place, but everything was where it should be. His phone was on the nightstand, the faint glow of the screen showing the time 4:12 a.m. He rubbed his eyes, exhaling slowly, trying to convince himself that the paranoia wasn't getting to him, but then he heard it, the faintest sound from outside, like gravel shifting under slow, deliberate footsteps. Every muscle in his body went tense as he reached for his phone, instinctively opening the security app to check the live feed from his cameras. The screen flickered to life, and there, at the edge of his driveway, was Clarence standing completely still, staring at the house like he was waiting for something. For a long moment, Alex just watched him, gripping the phone so tightly his fingers ached. The man wasn't moving, wasn't making any attempt to come closer or do anything outright illegal, but there was something calculated about his presence, something meant to unnerve, to remind Alex that no matter what steps he took, Clarence was still there, still watching, still playing whatever twisted game he had started. The worst part was that it was working. Alex could feel it creeping into his mind, the frustration, the helplessness, the raw anger of knowing that every logical, legal step he had taken so far had amounted to nothing. The system wasn't built for situations like this, where the threat wasn't a clear-cut crime but something more insidious, a slow, deliberate erosion of security and sanity. He took a breath, forced himself to think, to focus on what mattered. If Clarence wanted to test his patience, then fine. Alex could be patient too. He took a screenshot of the camera feed, saving the image as evidence, then set the phone down, refusing to give Clarence the reaction he wanted. Instead, he made coffee, went through his morning routine as if everything were normal, even as that unsettling presence lingered just outside. By the time the sun started to rise, Clarence was gone, the only sign of his presence the faint tire tracks left in the dew-covered grass and the ever-present stench of cigarette smoke that seemed to cling to the air whenever he was near. Alex spent the rest of the morning reinforcing his property, not because he thought it would stop Clarence. He was past believing anything would be that simple, but because he needed to do something, needed to feel like he had some control left. He replaced the locks, double-checked the security system, adjusted the cameras to cover more blind spots, anything to push back against the suffocating feeling that was taking hold of him. He was halfway through installing a second motion-activated floodlight near the back gate when he noticed something strange near the tree line at the edge of his property. At first, it just looked like a pile of discarded trash, a few crumpled beer cans, an old plastic bag tangled in the weeds, but then he saw the footprints, deep and deliberate, leading from the RV straight to that spot. His stomach tightened as he approached, his pulse pounding harder with every step. There, half buried in the dirt, was a bundle wrapped in an old, stained rag. He crouched down, carefully unwrapping the fabric, and immediately recoiled at the smell. The air was thick with the sickly sweet stench of decay, and when he pulled back the last layer of cloth, his breath caught in his throat. Inside was the severed head of a deer, its eyes clouded over, its fur matted with dried blood, its mouth frozen in a grotesque, unnatural snarl. The cut at the neck was jagged, crude, done with something dull and unclean. This wasn't a hunting accident. This was a message. Alex forced himself to stay calm, to think. He pulled out his phone, snapped several pictures, then wrapped the cloth back around the head before stepping away. His first instinct was to call the police, but he already knew how that conversation would go. There was no direct evidence linking Clarence to this. No security footage showing him placing it there, nothing that would hold up beyond a basic harassment report that would go nowhere. He needed something stronger, something undeniable. That night he didn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the RV, waiting for movement, waiting for Clarence to make a mistake. At 2:53 a.m., the motion sensor light flared to life. He didn't move, didn't react, just reached for his phone, opening the camera feed. Clarence was standing near the back gate, just beyond the floodlight's reach, half hidden in the shadows, holding something small and metallic in his hand. Alex zoomed in, heart hammering. A key. He didn't think. He moved. He grabbed the bat from beside his chair and stormed outside, the cold air biting at his skin as he stepped onto the porch. Clarence didn't flinch. He just stood there, smirking, spinning the key between his fingers. "You're getting jumpy, neighbor," he said, voice smooth, almost amused. Alex tightened his grip on the bat. "Where did you get that?" Clarence tilted his head. "What, this?" "Found it. Thought it might belong to you." Alex's patience snapped. "Get off my property." Clarence didn't move. "Or what?" Alex took a step forward. "You think this is a game?" Clarence chuckled. "It's always been a game, buddy. You just didn't know you were playing." Something in Alex's expression must have shifted, because for the first time, Clarence's smirk faltered just slightly, just enough for Alex to see it. Fear. Not much, but enough to tell him that beneath all the arrogance, all the games, there was a limit, a threshold that Clarence wasn't sure he wanted to cross. Alex exhaled slowly, forcing himself to step back. "This ends soon," he said, voice cold, certain. Clarence smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see." Alex turned, walked back inside, locked the door behind him. The next morning, the RV was gone. For a few seconds, he just stood there, staring at the empty space where it had been, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. No warning, no argument, just gone. The tire tracks were still fresh in the dirt, leading toward the main road, but there was no sign of Clarence, no note, nothing. Just silence. It felt wrong. He spent the day waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Clarence to come back, for something else to happen, but as the hours stretched on, nothing did. The tension in his chest didn't ease. If anything, it got worse. That night, he sat by the window again, watching, waiting, listening. At 3:27 a.m., his phone vibrated with a motion alert. He checked the feed, expecting to see Clarence, expecting to see the RV back in its place, but instead his blood turned to ice. The camera by the back gate was dead. The one at the driveway was offline. And there, in the corner of the screen, barely visible in the darkness, was a single word scrawled across his front door in thick, dripping black paint. Run. Alex stared at the words smeared across his front door, the thick black paint dripping in uneven streaks down the wood, the starkness of it almost surreal in the dim glow of the porch light. The message was clear, not just in its literal meaning but in what it represented. This wasn't about property disputes anymore. It wasn't about harassment. It wasn't about some delusional squatter refusing to leave. This was about something deeper, something more personal, a final escalation in a battle he hadn't realized he was fighting until he was already in too deep. He forced himself to take slow, measured breaths, gripping his phone tighter as he snapped a picture of the door, documenting everything even though he knew it wouldn't change a damn thing. The police wouldn't do anything. They never did. The silence around him felt heavier now, the kind that pressed against his ears and made every small sound feel amplified. The distant rustling of leaves, the faint creak of wood shifting against the cold night air, the hum of power lines overhead, it was all too sharp, too present, as if the world itself was waiting for something to happen. He turned slowly, scanning the yard, the driveway, the darkened street beyond, expecting to see Clarence standing there, watching, grinning, waiting for a reaction. But the RV was still gone, and the night was empty. And that made it worse. Clarence was somewhere out there, but for the first time since this nightmare started, he wasn't making himself visible. No smug remarks, no slow, taunting movements, no deliberate displays of power disguised as petty acts of defiance. Just absence. And absence meant planning. Alex didn't go back inside right away. He forced himself to stand there for a moment longer, letting the cold sink into his skin, forcing himself to think beyond the fear crawling up his spine. He knew better than to let his emotions dictate his next move. He had spent too many years learning how to stay ahead, how to anticipate threats before they became actual dangers. Clarence had made his move. Now it was Alex's turn. He went inside and locked the door behind him, reinforcing the deadbolt, sliding the security bar into place. His hands moved on instinct, checking each window, making sure the alarm system was still armed, flipping through the camera feeds on his phone with quick, precise motions. The back gate camera was still dead, but the others were working, each one showing nothing but empty spaces where Clarence should have been. It wasn't a relief. It was another warning. He didn't sleep. He sat in the living room, back against the wall, his phone in one hand, the baseball bat in the other, his mind running through every possibility, every worst-case scenario, every way this could go wrong. He thought about calling the police again, filing another report, demanding something be done, but he already knew how it would play out. They would show up, take notes, maybe do a half-hearted patrol of the area, and then they would leave, and he would still be here, alone, waiting for Clarence to make his next move. And then at exactly 4:19 a.m., the power went out. The house plunged into darkness so suddenly that for a split second, Alex thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him. But then he heard it, the faint mechanical whine of something shutting down, the soft click of circuits failing, the silence that followed as every electronic in the house died at once. The cameras, the alarm system, the motion sensors, everything. His phone screen flickered, then went black, the battery drained despite being at 70% just minutes ago. His breath came sharp and fast now, his fingers tightening around the bat as he forced himself to move, to act, to fight against the sudden wave of dread threatening to paralyze him. He reached for the flashlight he had left on the counter, flicked it on and swept the beam across the room in quick, controlled movements. The windows were still intact. The locks were still in place. But the house felt different now, as if something had shifted in the air itself, as if the very walls were holding their breath. And then the noise started. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, a low creaking sound like wood bending under slow, deliberate pressure. It was coming from the back of the house, near the kitchen, near the door that led to the yard. Alex moved quickly, staying close to the wall, keeping his footsteps light, his breath controlled. He reached the hallway just as the sound came again, louder this time, closer. He gripped the bat tighter, every muscle in his body coiled, ready. Then something slammed against the back door. Hard. The whole house seemed to shudder with the impact, the sound reverberating through the floors, the walls, the very air around him. He swallowed down the surge of panic rising in his throat, forcing himself to stay sharp, to stay focused. Another hit, this one more forceful, followed by the unmistakable sound of metal groaning under pressure. Someone Clarence was trying to break in. Alex moved fast, throwing his weight against the door just as another impact rattled through it. The force of it jarred his bones, sent a sharp, electric pain up his arm, but he held firm, planting his feet, bracing against the onslaught. He could hear breathing now, just beyond the door, heavy and deliberate, each exhale slow and measured. Then, a voice. "You should have left when you had the chance, Clarence." Alex didn't respond. He didn't waste breath on threats or warnings. He shifted his grip on the bat, tightening his stance, his mind narrowing into something singular, something sharp. The next hit never came. Instead, there was silence. A long, stretched-out pause where the only sound was the distant echo of his own breathing. Then, the unmistakable sound of footsteps retreating, slow at first, then faster, fading into the distance. Alex stayed where he was, waiting, listening, counting the seconds, the minutes, the passing of time, until the first hints of dawn started bleeding through the windows. Only then did he move, muscles stiff, body aching, head pounding with the force of adrenaline still coursing through his veins. When he finally opened the back door, the yard was empty. The gate was open. The night had swallowed Clarence whole. But Alex knew better than to think this was over. This wasn't an ending. This was just another beginning. Alex didn't sleep after that night. Even after Clarence had disappeared, after the police had come and gone once again with their useless reassurances and standard reports, after he had changed the locks, reinforced the doors, installed new security measures, and done everything within his power to reclaim his sense of control. The tension in his body refused to fade. It was as if something had been rewired inside him, an internal switch flipped permanently into high alert, his body existing in a constant state of readiness for a threat that no longer had a visible face. He told himself that this was normal, that it was just the aftermath of a prolonged conflict, that his mind simply needed time to adjust now that the immediate danger was gone. But deep down he knew better. Clarence might have left, but the damage he had done wasn't something that could be undone with locks and security cameras. The days stretched on, slow and heavy, each one blending into the next in a haze of exhaustion and paranoia. The RV never returned, and Clarence himself seemed to have vanished without a trace, but that absence only made things worse. It was easier to fight an enemy you could see, easier to prepare for something tangible than to constantly wonder when, or if, the other shoe would drop. He checked the cameras obsessively, scanned the yard for any sign of movement, waited for the inevitable moment when he would step outside and find some new sign that Clarence was still playing the game, still lurking just out of sight, waiting for Alex to let his guard down. But nothing happened. The world moved on, indifferent to everything he had been through, and eventually he was forced to confront the truth. This was his life now, not a temporary state of heightened awareness, but a permanent shift in how he existed in the world. He thought about moving, selling the house, cutting his losses, finding somewhere new to start over. But every time he considered it, every time he scrolled through listings of places that promised safety and security, he felt the same burning resentment coil inside him. That was exactly what Clarence would have wanted. For him to give up, to leave, to surrender his home because of some twisted territorial game. No, he had fought for this house, for his right to exist here without fear, and he wasn't about to let that bastard win. So he stayed. He forced himself into a routine, waking up at the same time every morning, drinking his coffee on the porch as if nothing had ever happened, walking the perimeter of his property, reinforcing the small, subtle security measures that had become second nature now. He worked, he exercised, he made himself busy, but no matter what he did, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for something. And then, exactly 6 weeks after Clarence had disappeared, Alex found the envelope. It was sitting on his doorstep, plain white, unmarked, no return address. For a long moment, he just stared at it, unwilling to move, unwilling to acknowledge what it meant. Then, slowly, carefully, he bent down and picked it up, the weight of it too light to be anything substantial, but still heavy enough to make his stomach twist with unease. He took it inside, placed it on the kitchen table, and just stood there, staring at it as if it might somehow reveal its secrets without him having to touch it. Finally, he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No threats, no cryptic messages, no taunts. Just 2 words, typed neatly in the center of the page, perfectly aligned, perfectly impersonal. Round 2. The paper slipped from his fingers, fluttering to the floor in slow, lazy spirals, but Alex didn't move to pick it up. He just stood there, staring at the empty space where it had been, his mind already racing through every possible scenario, every implication, every meaning those 2 simple words could hold. Clarence was still out there, and he wasn't finished.